Thank you very much, David. Our next speaker is Erin Pope. She's an activist with Stop Line 9.
Hi. All right, so I'm with the Toronto West End against Line 9. The Line 9 pipeline controversy has engaged quite a number of Toronto residents in the broader controversy over climate change and its implications for the city. So a number of different developments intertwine. As most of you probably know, Line 9 is a 38-year-old pipeline that runs through Toronto. Enbridge has applied to pump toxic corrosive tar sands and volatile fracked oil through it, also at a higher pressure and at a greater capacity than it has been used for in the past. This connects with municipal politics in a few ways. The City of Toronto made a forceful submission to the National Energy Board, posing a significant number of conditions for the Line 9 reversal, after they made a formal request for information from Enbridge, which was actually a motion that Rob Ford was against. The NEB is currently reviewing the project and should announce their decision in February or March of this year. And the city will be challenged to defend its submissions and insist on its conditions. Enbridge says the city's approach is unacceptable and in fact even refused to respond to the City of Toronto's request for information number 1, saying, and I quote, "The request is unreasonable, unduly onerous, and engages in a fishing expedition," end quote. This is significant because the NEB is known to approve over 90% of all oil proposals. The federal government cut a lot of environmental legislation with the Omnibus Bill of C-45, and an independent environmental assessment is not mandatory of this project. The provincial government has come forward and said it will not use its power to implement an independent environmental assessment either. Richard Kupriewicz, a pipeline safety expert with over 40 years of experience in the energy sector, came out and said the probability of Line 9 rupturing is over 90%. So, who will be left to foot the bill if there is a spill? Enbridge reports it only has general liability insurance covering up to $685 million Canadian. This is particularly troubling because a $1 billion economic cost is probable if Line 9B ruptures in a high consequence area, but not an urban setting. Well, if it were to rupture in an urban setting such as Toronto, these costs could escalate to $5 to $10 billion when key infrastructure is affected. These cost estimations are based on market economics and do not include less predictable costs such as loss of human life. It's impossible to know exactly how the cost could land on Torontonians, but all taxpayers will be affected by a leaker spill in this high consequence area. So when faced with all this information on one project alone, it is clear we need a strong candidate to stand up for the people of the city, but there's much more involved than just Line 9. It appears that the Lac-Mégantic death train went through Toronto. The entire chain of oil transport derailments show the danger to the city from transport of toxic petroleum products, whether by rail or pipeline, and safety procedures should not be taken for granted. In addition, Toronto is being hit with unprecedented extreme weather events, which illustrate the hazards we run because of climate change. Hotter atmosphere makes for more extreme weather, hotter heat waves, and colder deep freezes, and in particular, unprecedented heavy precipitation. In the last year, the city has suffered 2 major water disasters. The City of Toronto is currently on the hook for $93 million, the cost of responding to and the cleanup for the recent ice storm in December 2013. 1 million residents were without power for days. Toronto is currently looking for aid from provincial and federal governments on that. The City of Toronto is also facing a $60 million price tag after the flooding in July of 2013. And this does not include the $850 million in private claims for the Insurance Bureau of Canada. The city's slow response to these weather events show how rundown the infrastructure is and how limited its disaster response capabilities are. Rob Ford claims his governance is responsible for millions going into waterway infrastructure, but this is actually the handiwork of mayors past. Before the end of Mayor Mel Lastman's term, Council approved the so-called Wet Weather Flow Management Master Plan, a tongue twister, and a 25-year, $1 billion program of projects designed to make the city somewhat more absorbent during heavy rain. Much of that planned wet weather project spending has been delayed indefinitely, and it did not take climate change into account. Meanwhile, city transit is paralyzed. A qualitative expansion of public transit is a significant part of the alternative to climate change, reducing emissions and putting investment dollars to a better purpose, and making hazardous transport of toxic petroleum through the city obsolete. We feel a progressive alternative to Ford has to encompass all of these issues. Broad democratic consultation is needed on how to prevent climate change and to adjust to it. And the ruling program needs to be placed at the center of civic planning and investment. So the West End Group, we've been focusing a lot of our energies on making the connection between climate change, Line 9, and how the City of Toronto, and people all over this country really, are paying for it with their tax dollars in different places that aren't so obvious to some voters. So we've been doing a lot of education work on that and campaigning with different levels of government officials.
Thank you. Okay, we have 2 speakers left. The next speaker is Liz Rowley. She's the Ontario leader of the Communist Party of Canada. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm also a former public school trustee and served on boards of health and elsewhere in the civic field. And I've also worked on municipal campaigns for ever, I think. And one of the most significant ones was in Rexdale. And it was when Stan Nemiroff was elected. Some of you may remember that, probably most of you don't. But what was significant about that election campaign, it was a by-election. Stan had been the runner-up in the general election, and the board was split. The school board was split with 1 vote more that the right wing had than those who were not right wing. That is to say, those who were opposed to the cuts. And so the election of Stan Nemiroff was the guy who broke the tie and made it impossible for the school board to go ahead with the cuts that the provincial government was demanding. And as such, his election was very important to the whole city, well, beyond that, because after that, of course, that was when the school board refused to implement the cuts that were demanded. That's when the provincial government stepped in and put the board under trusteeship, and following that, the boards in Hamilton and Ottawa were also put under trusteeship. So was that a good result? Well, no. Nobody wanted the school boards under trusteeship, but it did point out that there was a fundamental rift between what the people of this city want in terms of public education and what the provincial government was prepared to deliver. It also put the school boards, the right wing of the school boards, in a very difficult situation. And by the way, Kathleen Wynne was very involved in that fight on the right side of the argument. She too is a populist, and that's one of the ways that she got elected, by the way, was drawing on that experience. Well, I want to say that it was Rexdale, right, which is the heart of where Ford and these ideas seem to, at least where he has been very active. And I think while 2002, when Stan was first elected, is a little bit different than 2014, it's certainly before the 2008 crisis, the fact is that people in Rexdale have been living in really miserable conditions, making very poor wages, high levels of poverty and everything else back then as well as now. Maybe worse now, but the conditions were there then. And what Stan's election showed, it seems to me, is that right-wing ideas don't have to prevail. They don't always prevail. A lot hinges on whether there's an alternative, right? And in Stan's case, he campaigned on the basis that he was opposed to the cuts, he would vote against the cuts, and he would be working with all of the people on the school board who were opposed to those cuts. And he got a big vote, and he got elected. So I think the question of an alternative is extremely important. And I want to pick up on the last comments that our main speaker made about what's necessary. And if I heard you correctly, I think what you said was that we need to put together, or a coalition needs to be put together from the NDP to Big L Liberals. And I'd like to disagree with you about that.
That's exactly not what I said.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what I think, and I'm glad I misheard you in that case.
You said an alternative to that. Sorry.
I beg your pardon?
He said he wanted an alternative to that.
Okay, well, good, so do I. And I'm sorry, I've been sick in the last week, and perhaps with all of the coughing that I've been doing tonight, I misheard. But I think what is needed is a coalition of forces, but not based on a political affiliation, if anybody is thinking along those lines, but on the basis of policy, on the basis of what do you want to see in this city, and on the basis of pulling together forces who agree on a platform and who are prepared to advance candidates, put candidates in the field, or support candidates who are willing to tie into that platform and deliver that platform. A coalition of forces that is active and busy between elections as well as during elections. Some example of that might be the Campaign for Public Education in Toronto, which has been very busy on an ongoing basis on the education side of things. I think there are some problems there, but I think that is the kind of thing that we need to be looking at. I also think that we need to, in a lot of ways, change is in the air, as so many previous speakers have said, and as you said in your opening talk. And I think that, people are feeling very cynical about the main political parties, about the legislature, about the city hall, about the federal government and so on. And they want change. And when we were campaigning in North York in the last municipal election, and there were Ford signs all over the place, and you stop to ask people, what is it, I see you were supporting Mr. Ford, what is it you think that he's going to do for you? The answers were almost always the same. And they were, he understands that I can't do this anymore. I can't pay all these bills, I can't hang on to my house, I don't know if I'm going to have a job, I can't get my kids through college or university. He is the only one who understands that. And he knows who's responsible for this mess. And who is it? Well, it's the unions, it's women, it's immigrants, and so on and so forth. And for people who are very sophisticated, politically sophisticated, or what have you, or for whatever reasons, this has got some appeal to it. But again, then the question of an alternative is very important. Is there another explanation of the world about why these things are happening? Well, sure there is. It's Occupy. It's the 1%. And I think we have to also start taking apart, Ford in the way that we've started to tonight, and obviously before this. But one of the things about Ford is not only the people who are drawn to him for these spurious reasons, but the people who are backing him. Now, these are the guys with the big money. And like most very reactionary political forces, and I would say that the more that's coming about this, more that's coming out about this guy, the more there is to be worried about. If there is going to be a fascist movement in this country, it's guys like that. I mean, just look at it. I'm not saying he's a fascist, but I'm saying if you were looking to see where something like, where are the seeds? Well, they're right here. Anyway, an alternative is very important, and what we can do, it seems to be, to pull together those forces. It would help a lot if we had a single candidate, progressive candidate for mayor, and hopefully John Tory will run, and a whole bunch of other right-wingers, and split that vote. And as others have said, just in conclusion, of course, it's not just the mayor. We have to elect this time a progressive majority at City Hall. And that will what really turns things in terms of policy and so forth.
Our final speaker tonight is Herman Rosenfeld. He's a retired CAW national staff person and a member of the UCWA. Go ahead.
Okay, I can't speak really for the Assembly. We're a mixed bag for sure, and the Socialist Project is really a network of socialists. So I'm really speaking for myself, really. And I think the first thing is that one of the reasons why the people who were asked to speak here is because one thing we all share, whatever else differences we all have, is that we don't have a phobia against electoral participation. And I think that's a critical component of whatever that means. It means that we don't think that these institutions should be avoided, even if we want to transform them. But in an era where we have no socialist political entity really of any salt that has a base, and a lot of us are really not that organized. For this moment in this particular election, it requires various kinds of experimental building exercises, but it doesn't mean ignoring the things that need to happen in the short run. The principles, I think we have to start with principles driving our participation in this electoral cycle, and should be followed whatever. And one is, we need to find an opening to develop and present a clear and modest in breadth, but not so modest in what we say, a platform, and people have all mentioned that kind of a thing. You have to say things programmatically that combine radical socialist policies rooted in ongoing aspirations and struggles of things that people want in the short run, on a series of key issues. It might include things like a living wage, affordable housing that isn't technocratically imposed, but ordinary people and communities have some way of shaping it, other than condos being determined by developers. Transit and massive transit investment, which allow lowering fares and improving services, and also having some way of people shaping it. Undoing privatization and democratically reforming the delivery of those formerly private services. Job creation elements which are different, because that's one of the key elements. Social development, not police repression in communities. And a challenge to the tyranny and the obsession with business investment climate, which in fact drives so much. And that's not just an ideology, it has to do with limiting, intervening in those capacities which give private capital such power. And the question of taxes. We can bring a kind of analytical clarity to these issues that no one else can. And when we don't have huge forces and resources on the ground, that's really important. It's an important contribution. The idea is also to develop our capacities to build socialists in the process, popularize socialist ideas, and take on issues and talk to people. Some of those things that Stefan talked about on the theoretical level, they have resonance in concrete when you actually talk to people about those things, rather than throwing the ideas. They're there. It's a way of engaging with people. We also need to contribute to the defeat of the hard right on the ground, such as Ford and the right-wing majority on the city council, for reasons that people said, and Liz and other people. And we can only do what we have the capacity to do. So what does that mean to what I think we can do right now in this particular electoral cycle, even though I aspire to bigger things too? Uniting behind an open socialist candidate for council, running on a clear, radical, but rooted platform, we don't have the resources to do that. That doesn't mean we would say we should support people who are doing that, but we don't really have the resources to run that way right now. Running a socialist candidate for mayor, well, we can't really do that either. Or even a de Blasio type, we don't have that capacity here. Working to develop a platform that is clear and in partnership with ongoing campaigns, such as TTC Riders, SPC, and others, but independent of them, but in alliance, we can do that. Attending all candidates' meetings and targeting a couple of city council campaigns where there are more progressive candidates, and supporting those people, perhaps like Michael or Paul or whoever else, Paul and other people who are running. Working with key social movements, we can do that. And political clarity is what we do best. An example of one of the things that was done is that some of the people from TTC Riders put together a report card on transit voting that Jennifer did in Scarborough. And we can do that on other kinds of issues. But it's a way in to be able to have a voice, a platform to be able to talk. We can informally support and participate as individuals or as groups with all kinds of limitations, of course, in particular electoral campaigns. Personally, I want to have an alternative to the Olivia Chow bandwagon, but she's the only one that's running. I might put up a sign, I might vote for it to keep the right out. But I wouldn't that's not where I want to put my work in, and I'd want to be able to produce something bigger. But there are other campaigns that are on the ground. I said there's Michael's. I don't know what you're running on, Paul, but you might want to run on something. There are people who are challenging this. Our inability to actually engage as a force, even a small one, I'm just about finished, reflects the ongoing need for us to build a movement of socialists, even as we engage in other struggles for reform and try and influence these. It also reflects certain phobias that a lot of us, that our movement has been hampered by. A lot of people have argued against any electoral politics of any kind, under a kind of an inordinate ideological weight of certain forms of anarchist thinking, and also some people who call themselves socialists have done that as well. I don't see the assembly as being like a forum to actually form this coalition, but it's a space where we can talk about these things. We need to do that, and it would be really good if enough of us came together to talk about contributing to some kind of way of developing a kind of a platform, and not an abstract one that combines some of these kinds of things. So I'll stop there.